Well, hello guys, and welcome back. So today we have a couple of things I would want to look at. One would be talking a little bit about middlewares, how they work as interceptors for requests, and then of course we're talking about testing, and then of course mocking as well. Because if you remember, we're working with database, and we would want to write tests that would, of course, not have to maybe write an actual entry into our database, so more or less simulate the actual way the database could work, but of course, just within our test environment. Of course, if we would want to do some form of integration test where we can actually write into a database, that's of course a different topic altogether. But we would want to be able to break our codes into functional units so we can test all those individual units independently without having to manage the dependencies with other components or other logical units of our application. So of course, the first thing we're going to do more or less would be to start to refactor our code, and then of course introduce middlewares, and after that we'll then move over to testing, because I think we'll spend most of our time talking about testing. So without wasting so much of our time, let's just jump in and start with our refactoring to introduce middlewares. So like I said, initially we'll start by with refactoring our middlewares. As you can see, I already created a new branch. So this is where everything we'll be doing in this video would be located. So if you would want to check this out, of course, go to this branch, and then you have every piece of code we'll be writing in this tutorial. Anyways, what I would like to do is to go in here. So we had here a lot of helper functions, one helping us to connect to our Postgres database, and we also have this one here that we are using to connect to our Microsoft's SQL database. So what I would want to do would be to turn these actually to middleware, so would have them attached to certain APIs only where we want them to be. And so I'm just going to go ahead and start with these two. I'll create a new file. I can call this SQL. I think this is already okay because it would be within the package middleware, of course. And I'll create another one for Postgres because I would like to show you how this works on package middleware. I would like to create one for config. Of course, it will all be package middleware. And maybe just also show you, I would like to create one for cores. And I think that's mostly it. If we cover this four, I think you should have everything you need. So for cores, I think it's pretty straightforward. I would just create a function here. I can call this cores middleware. So it should more or less all middlewares in gin always have the same signature. More or less, they return a gin.HandlerFunc, which would more or less, which is actually similar to the handlers we've been defining all along. So this would return a pointer to come on HandlerFunc, this one, and this is what it should return. So what I would like to do here is just create a string of allowed headers, and I just wrote this down, so this should be totally fine. So these are some of the headers I would like to allow, so content type, length, and the rest. And now of course we need to return a handler more or less, so that's also pretty straightforward. So it has to be a function that takes in a gin context, and then of course we should return this function. Basically, that's really what we'd want to do. And of course here is pretty straightforward, so I would like to maybe add some headers. So I can say context.writer.header, and I would want to set a couple of headers, and I can call this this might be of course this need to be tuples. So maybe to be pretty, I think this should be returned already. We have here. So yeah, of course, I also down here, if everything goes well, I need to call c.next. Of course, that would be in reference to our gin context, but surely that should actually be inside of our function, because outside here we don't know. See that next like this. Of course, we need to just return the handler, not a pointer to it. So that's why we get this error anyways. But now I would like to set a couple of headers here. So first one would be access control allow origin. And this is actually where you get to set your origin. So for now, I'm just going to set this to localhost. So again, I need to set a couple more headers. And here I would like to maybe allow credentials. So access control, allow credentials, and I'll set this to true. And of course, I have to set this as a string because the tuple should be a string of string, as you can see. And I would like to come on. I would like to set these headers. So access control allow headers, and now I will set my allowed headers. And what else? Maybe allowed methods, and that should already be fine. Header header dot sets and access control allow methods, and here we also pass a string, so this string could contain a number of http methods. So we could allow options, we could of course allow get, put, patch, maybe also head, for example, if we would want to do some monitoring to see if our server is up more or less, but that's already fine. And then maybe what we'd want to do, of course, is to handle options. So if we have a pre-flight, of course, we would want to handle this. So if request dot method, if this is equal to options, in this case, we would like to abort the request. So here I can say abort with status, and here I would use my http status no content, and of course return. And that's more or less all we need for our course middleware. I think that's already more than what we need. So now we can go to our SQL middleware. So what I can basically do actually is probably just copy all of this. Okay, and then come back in here and then go and start creating this. I can call this SQL middleware like this. And again, it's gonna return a handler func like this. So here we return a function that looks like this exactly. And now I dump all of this inside of here. And we would clean this part up soon, but that's also fine for now. But of course, we don't really return this. So what I would want to do is to set this inside the gin context. So I use the set function this way. And so I'm going to change this to C, not this is better for me this way. And then I have to give it a name. I can call it SQL client, and of course pass db. So what it means is that if we pass this to any middleware, this would of course provide us with a client, and then we get to close this connection when that request terminates. That's more or less what we'll do. I think this is pretty straightforward. And of course, for our Postgres, we also do very similar to the other one. So I call this Postgres middleware, and I like them to be explicit this way, just so I don't mix things up. So handler func, again, we return func this way. So it takes a pointer to gin contests, and we more or less return this our user. And again, we do the same here. So c.sets, no, and we give it a name. I can call it Postgres client, and I pass DB. So I can get rid of this one. And that's more or less what we have to do actually. So if you look in here, if we look at one of the handlers, say inside our users, maybe create user, and if I hover over this, or more or less if I go to our API definitions, for example, which we should be able to find up here, maybe go into auth, and then if I hover over here, you would see like this more or less takes a string as our path. And of course, the handler is this handler func. But the cool thing actually is not that it only takes just one, but it can take an array. So what it means is that I can actually just copy this, for example, and just maybe make copies of it, and that should still be fine because it fulfills this requirement here. And that's why we write middlewares that have this signature, so that when you visit this endpoint, it will process this, it will handle these handlers in this manner. So this would be handled first, then this second, and then this third. And if anything should happen, or if there should be any error here, you have the option to either propagate it down to the subsequent ones, or you simply terminate. So, but of course, we don't want to process the same thing 3 times. That if, for example, if you try to log out, or if you're trying to create an account, then we create it three times. That would not make sense anyways. But in our case, we can now replace this to our, say, our cause middleware. So if you fulfill our cause requirements, then the next thing might be to provide an auth middleware where we handle like the user authentication, and then in that order. So that's really the cool thing about this. But of course, I'm going to get rid of this so I don't confuse someone. Um, anyway, so now we have our cause middleware set up, we have this set up, and we have this set up. Now, I would like also have configs middleware set up, because I would really want to remove this logic from here so that our middlewares don't have to worry about fetching environment variables. Because again, I need to have separation of concerns here. So I would like to move this logic completely into a different middleware. And that's probably just what we're going to do next. So what I can quickly do is to come inside of our helpers and then maybe create a new function, and I can call this config.go. Of course, we should not forget to provide the package. Package is helpers. And in here, I would like to define a struct that would match more or less our env file. Of course, I don't want to open the env file because the credentials to my database, as you can remember, are in there. But the cool thing, of course, maybe I split this into 2 screens so we can see better. But if we take a look at, let's say, SQL database, for example, we see we have the server, user, password, port, and all of this information. So what I can quickly do more or less would be to come here and define a struct. I can call this conf and maybe config. And now I provide all of this access SQL. Server would be a string. SQL user will still be a string. SQL password will be a string, and SQL port would let's make this int. I'm not sure. Okay, let's make it as int 64. We'll see how that works out for us. And of course, SQL database will be a string. So this is more or less going to represent for now all the environment variables we'd like to provide to this application. And now what we would need to do is more or less to be able to read the values we have in our .env file, and then somehow pass that into this struct, and then have this struct again passed to any of our APIs that need access to these environment variables. That's really the plan here. And to do this actually pretty straightforward. We need a library called Viper. And this we can actually get from, so I try to import it here. I have to import it this way. So it's actually github.com/spf13 and then Viper like this. And now I need to define a function down here, so I can call this load config. So this is supposed to take a path to our environment variables, and then of course then return two things to us. So it should be able to, when we provide the path, it should be able to read this env file, pass this into this struct, and of course return this to us. And because of that, would return two things. One would be our env config, and of course an error if everything don't go as we expect. That's really the plan. And so this, what we can now do more or less would be, I'm just going to keep it as simple as possible, but I need you to understand what we are doing. So cfg would be this, or common. So this should be our env config. And now SQL server, we can use what we have over here actually. So put this in here and save. And of course, we don't need this anymore because we are in this within the same package. So now we have SQL user. I'm just going to copy this and put it in here because I'm lazy to type. And again, I'm going to update, of course, the string, so I've not forgotten that. SQL port. And now, of course, I need to write a new. Yes, okay, I already have one already, so I can say it as int. Oh, is this? Okay, so yeah, I'm gonna keep it simple. So you're also gonna be int. So don't want to do this actually. That's totally fine. And I put this to, I don't know, 1306 for now. And the last one, of course, will be SQL database, and I put this one as well. So I'm just gonna copy this one. User will be user. Password would be password. Ports would be ports, and of course, database would be database. And so if everything goes well, so I would like to actually maybe do one of two things. So I don't want to save, or I saved already, but it's fine. I'm going to have to import this again, but that's totally fine. So, but what I would want to do is if we run our app in release mode, for example, then within, of course, it would not make sense for us to commit our env file into any public code repository. So in that case, I would expect that we inject this somehow into our code, maybe during the build phase. So if we have this pipeline with which we set this up, then of course we have to inject this through the pipeline. But if that's not the case, if we are running locally, then we can have an a.env file. So what I can now do is I will try to say if get env, I need to provide an variable here, and I can call this app mode, and I'm just going to set this to debug, and I'll say if this is intentionally set to release, for example, if this is set to release, then this what would do. So more or less we know that we are, let's say, in our production environment. And if that's the case, of course, we simply now return cfg and nil. But of course, if that's not the case, if we are running locally like we are doing right now, now I can use the Viper that I tried to add before. So that is a method called config path like this. And here I will provide the path. So if I hover over this, if my IntelliSense behaves itself, it's not okay. I think we'll first need to, of course, go mode tidy because I don't think I have this, of course, so that's totally fine. And now we should have it. Yes, and now if I hover over this, now you can see we add the path for Viper more or less to search this config file. And then so if we have this, what I would now want to do is, of course, I need to tell it more or less break the file into two. So there are two options, of course. So if you read over here, more or less, we can use it this way, or we also have the option to say viper.set config name, and we'll provide the name of the file. So if, for example, if we rename this to app.env, so we can give the name of the file as app or whatever, and then we'll need to, of course, set the extension using viper.set config type, and now we can set this to env. So in the end, it's going to be app.env. That's more or less what we can do, and then we only now need to call this function viper.automatic.env, this one. And now we would need to, of course, read in the config, and then, of course, marshal what we've read into our struct, and then return the struct. That's basically what we have to do. So now we say viper dot read in config, and of course this returns an error, so we have to handle the error. So we say if this error and this error is not equal to nil. If this is the case, what we like to do is simply return env config, and we return the error. And if that's not the case, the next thing we'd want to do, of course, will now be to unmarshal. And then we have to unmarshal into our config this way. And of course, this also returns an error, which of course you would probably know already. So we have to handle this error again, like this. Pretty straightforward. I'm just gonna copy this. I don't want us to waste so much time, so I'm just gonna dump this here. Also because I'm lazy. And if everything goes as expected, now we can. I'll just return this guy, and that's it. That's more or less what we have to do. So what it now means, more or less, is that's over here. We might actually need to get rid of this. So we might actually need to get rid of this, because what it means is that we now have the option of supplying this middleware first before this. So that way we would have this before we get to our middleware. Sorry, before we go to our SQL middleware. And to use this more or less, because we have access to our gin.Context, so here I can say cfg for config, and this would be from what is the syntax? I think this should be must get, like this, and now we have to provide the name of this. So well, maybe I think we've not actually even completed this one. So we only just implemented this function here. So now we can go over to the middleware and implement this. So I'll call this func config middleware. Again, as usual, it's gonna return a handler func like this, and it's pretty straightforward. We return func, this one, thank you, but I always just want to go with C. That's totally fine for me. And now I would need, I can call this maybe env an error, because now I need to use the function we created. So we called it what did we call it? So load config. So I can say so help us at load config, and now I'm just going to point it to our current directory. So we need to point it to our current directory, which is what we're doing here. And remember, we have to handle this error. So now I can say if this error is not equal to nil, I would want to do a couple of things. I would of course want to abort, so we don't move on to the next middleware. And if we abort, I would like to return to the user some human understandable error. In that case, this would of course be my fault. So I'm just going to term this as a internal server error. It should be an internal server error in my opinion. And I need to provide additional information, and I can say error. I am leaving this for you, or leaving this to you rather, to provide more human readable error. So, and in that case, I return to the user. But if everything goes well, of course, as before, I need to set this into the gin.Context, and I can call this app env, for example, and then I pass my env like this. Pretty straightforward. And now I can put this side by side. So now we can actually get rid of this. And now we say must get like this. And the key, of course, would be this guy over here. So we call it app env. So must get, if it doesn't get this, is gonna panic, as you've seen here. So if you forget to put this before, if you forget to pass this middleware, config middleware before this SQL middleware, is gonna panic. That's just what's gonna happen. And of course, we need to, of course, provide the type, because Go, as you know, is statically typed. And so this should now come from helpers.env config like this. And now I can just call this app env like this. And so if we now have this in this format, as you can already imagine, we have access to everything we need in here. So of course, this should actually be a pointer to this. So let me just be sure. Yes, this should be. And now what we can simply do is we come over here, we say app env.sql server. I think that was what was there. Okay. App env.user, sql user. Now password. App env.port and app env.sql database like this. So now we only need to have this here. As you can see, we don't need this middleware, doesn't really need to know about anything about how to extract this environment variables. It should only just know how to use it. It should be able to have access to it when it needs it. That's really how it should be. And so that way we have actually separated these two. And of course, you can already imagine. So for our Postgres middleware, we would of course need to provide all these variables as well to connect to it. And you can already imagine all you would need to do would be more or less to extend. Not this Y, not this guy, but this one, to extend this to I don't know, whichever number of environment variables you would need to set in your app, and of course update the logic here mostly. Of course, down here you shouldn't have any problem on marshalling that into your struct, and then of course pass this before. So what it means, for example, now is if we go to our, let's say we go to our APIs, and we go to our APIs and we have auth, for example. So if we go to our login, I think for here we actually needed to yes, we needed to read through our database more or less. So what we can already just do to use this, maybe we can actually start with these other ones. So by default, I'm assuming that all our endpoints should of course have the cause middleware. So here I can already say um, use. And now, as you can see again, this function signature, it takes an array of them. And now here I can provide the middleware. I would like to provide the config first. And after the config, I will now provide cores. So by default, all our endpoints would have this. And now if we come back to auth, for example, over here, here we can now provide this. So now I can say middleware middleware dot SQL middleware like this. And that way, of course, before this guy would have already appended this tool for us. And then when we get here, we would also have access to this. So that's really the point. And I think actually with our current setup, it also makes sense to have this in here. And of course, if every of the endpoints within this would need to have this, then it also makes sense that actually we come over here and then we say use, and then we'll put all of them here. So I can just put this here once and for all, and now we don't need to put it here anymore. So that's actually one way of doing it. Yeah, that's more or less it. So now we can actually already start doing some cleanups, more or less to remove what we don't need anymore. And I think we can easily skim through all of this. So we have this already. And now I can actually maybe come over here where we have this guy. And I can now maybe actually comment this out. So just to see where this was actually used or where it's being used. And I comment this out this way. And I can go through the endpoints to the APIs. And now I see that this is actually being used here, which is really nice. So now what I need to do more or less is to just get rid of this one and now get it this way. So we now see that must get, and we called it, if I'm not mistaken, I'll take one more look just to be sure. So SQL client, and this should be of type pointer to gum.db. So we'll come back here. So SQL client, and this will be of type gum.db like this. And everything should now also be fine as before. So now I can actually copy this because I know that's also the problem with all these other endpoints. So we go to create, we get rid of this, and we'll put this one, and we are good to go. As simple as that. We come in here, we get rid of this again, provide this one, and we are good to go. And then we come here as well. Exactly, that's actually, as you can see, pretty straightforward. We don't need to repeat ourselves. And we go to get, we do the exact same thing, and that's fine. This one as well. I think my PC is getting quite slow. I have no idea why. Now, as you can see, we have cleaned up everything. And now actually we don't need this anymore because I can actually now go ahead and delete this. It's no longer needed actually. And I think that's mostly what we would want to cover as regards to middleware. So again, I think this is really pretty straightforward. If you found anything confusing, please just take your time, pause the video, go back, go through it, and trust me, once you grab the hang of it, maybe working with middlewares in Go, and at least as it pertains to the gin framework, is pretty straightforward.